And I'm going to call up now for a presentation David Johnson from Decooda. David is a local here in Atlanta, and I've gotten to know his company just a little bit. And by way of endorsement, I believe that Lenny Murphy is on your advisory board.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yes, he is.
And I will leave you to further present yourself however you wish.
Great. Thanks, Seth. You know, I don't really know what to say about Seth's slide that indicated that in 1958 we actually began analyzing these types of technologies. And when you look at kind of where we are today, I'm going to get out of the lights here. When you look at where we are today, from a client perspective, it's pretty underwhelming when you consider how many corporations actually have human moderation factories stuck in the middle of processes to really mine out the real data that exists within unstructured data. So to the question in the back of the room, in terms of where will we be in 10 years, I'm hopeful that we can make greater progress than we've made in the last 60 years as we move forward. So I'm assuming that much of this will become accelerated over time. I'm going to talk a little bit about big data, a little bit about text analytics. I'm going to talk about a client example specifically related to user experience, kind of online user experience. So how do I transition my slides?
Sorry, there's a clicker.
Is there? Clicker. All right, great. All right, great. So first I'm going to talk about big data. And you know, big data is not going away, obviously. We all know that with the emergence of the Internet of Things and all the data that continues to come our way, and the fact that just unstructured, curated consumer data is going to double over the next several years. But that being said, when we look organizationally how we're structured today, organizations are still structured based upon a 1940s and 50s philosophy. We're very siloed in our orientation. We don't do a great job of being able to address consumers. I recently moved, and I transitioned from DirecTV to Comcast. And we all know where Comcast stands in overall user experience. And I will say that after $1 billion investment that they made in Voice of Customer, they have a little bit more work to do in improving the customer experience going forward. And so I think that in many cases, is the result of the fact that although we're organized in certain ways and we don't really have owners for consumers within organizations because of the siloed organization style that we have, you know, the reality is that consumers and data don't care how we're organized. And you have kind of the emerging market and the millennials being at cross purposes with how we're organized to address these scenarios. And fundamentally what it does is it's driving companies crazy, right? It ties companies in knots as we move forward, and we're trying to incorporate the consumer perspective into kind of the world that we live in today. And the tension that exists is enormous, and it's what's driving this emergence of new technology in organizations today. And so, you know, one of the questions that I have is, it seems so obvious for me in this industry to say, why can't we just rally around a customer, right? We all know that we need to do a better job, but why do we continue to drop the ball? Why don't we do as good a job as we could possibly do? And so we talk about big data. Everybody knows it in the form of the 4 V's. Volume, you know, lots of data at rest. Velocity, data in motion, streaming information. Variety, right? We have many different forms of data. Unstructured data as it relates to call center, as Seth said. We have social media. We have video. We have all this audio-based data. And then there's veracity, data in doubt. This is data that needs some enrichment for us to get some value out of it. And we've added one called vicinity, right? Data comes from many places. It can come from deep within your organization. It can come from way outside your organization. Perhaps somebody writes an article that dings you for customer experience. That motivates a CEO to get, you know, organized around how we address that particular issue. But the issue that I have is that it kind of indicates, oh, there's only one type of data in doubt, right? The reality is all data is in doubt. And when we start to merge more data together, the more doubt there is, right? So the problem's not getting smaller in any way. The problem's just getting larger as we move forward. So perhaps the reason that we don't align to customers better than we should is we lack confidence and we lack the insights to understand how we would organize. What's the quantifiable value of us really centering around a consumer experience? So I have an example of the executive dilemma. So is that a cloud or a smoke signal, right? These are what executives deal with every single day. And the answer is, I need to know more. I need to see the context of the entire picture for me to understand what I deal with. Executives, senior executives, on average, CMOs specifically, make roughly 500 individual decisions related to attribution-based decisions around marketing, right? And so it's up to them to think about how we're going to weave all this stuff together in order to bring it together and provide a better overall customer experience going forward. So at the end of the day, the demand is this, right? Customers want to understand how their customers think, feel, and act about their products and experiences or their brand, right? And how those translate into individual behaviors so that we can further understand the importance of each consumer touchpoint in context. You would think that since 1958, where we were, given where we are today, 60 years later, that we would have this solved, but we don't, right? And so the question is, what gets in the way of us solving this, a problem that we know we've had for so long? Well, as you all know, many of you have charts like this. Anybody in this industry has a chart like this. And this is kind of the best practice, right? I think that when the whole big data concept kicked off several years ago, to some extent I give credit to the movie Moneyball, right? That's when everything kind of emerged, and right, what we were going to have is we're going to have this big Moneyball machine in the sky. We're all going to log into it, and we're going to download home runs. We're going to make a lot of money on this stuff, right? And the reality is it really didn't deliver, right? But that being said, I think that if we were all to say if it were a perfect world, what we would have is we would have the ability to have a big data platform where we would ingest all this information. We would analyze it at some level that would allow us to understand demographic-based information, personas, affective, cognitive types of things that Seth was talking about, experience-related functions. We'd be able to do some additional analytics on top of that data. But that would be the markup process, right? We'd mark up that data, we'd put it in a bucket for specific applications and vertical capabilities. And then, of course, because we're a big company, we have a big ecosystem of technology, it needs to coexist. So I need to be able to tie it in with other things within my enterprise. And that is, by and large, pretty much the platform that people strive for. The reality is that if you're a Fortune 500 company and you have high-velocity consumer communications, I would bet, dollars to donuts, that you have a human moderation factory somewhere in your process because you don't trust the data that you have. And the failure is in this first individual area, right? I'm not getting the data marked up at a level that I have any confidence that I can put it in a downstream system unless I have somebody look at it. A company like IIeX at Omnicom has 1,000 people that do essentially human moderation. AT&T has a huge human moderation factory. Everybody in the telecommunications industry has a human moderation factory. That's the problem. That's where we need to focus. So I'm going to kind of transition now. I'm going to talk about one specific type of data, a piece of data that would be much more valuable, I think, to all of us as consumers. There's a lot of people here that do survey work today, right, out in the hallways talking about how we do this. Let me ask by a show of hands, how many people have taken a structured survey, and when they finished it, they said, wow, that was a fulfilling experience. I was able to communicate exactly what was on my mind. By and large, and these people out there do fantastic work, right? But what they've done is they've accelerated our ability to piss customers off by asking them more and more and more questions, right? And so the reality is, we're not listening, we're tone deaf in the marketplace. If we think about how people communicate today, we communicate like this, right? We're texting, we're typing, we're talking, right? But what we're doing is we're essentially not asking people to communicate their feedback to us in that manner. So I'm going to specifically talk about a survey methodology that we use that's kind of an innovative approach that allows us to get to this data. And I'm going to talk about it in context of a streaming video application. So what if, rather than asking 50 questions, 25 questions, 15 questions, what if I ask this question, specifically related to understanding innovation opportunities? Now, imagine that you are the CEO of a company that offers a streaming video service. You have been given a limitless budget and limitless resources in order to overhaul one of your services. The goal is to make that change that will make it a complete game changer and a must-have for consumers of the video content market. What would you do, right? What if you could ask that question, get somebody to provide their insights, and you could basically do all the heavy lifting on that? Identify not only the individual things that they're talking about, but the emotions associated with those things. How it might influence their persona. How it might influence an overall experience, right? Maybe I'll follow that up with a liker question, but what if I ask 2 questions, right? And I do it in a way that consumers want to communicate. What if I told you we could ask that type of question, or any of these types of questions, or several other types of questions, and do all the heavy lifting for our customers so that they don't have to put customers through the process of having them go through and answer 15, 20, 50 questions. So if we listen a little bit better, we might get some better answers. So what's the value of this data when it comes out? Well, when we ask imaginative questions, just as an example, with traditional types of questions. These are traditional open-ends, not even structured. Traditional types of questions, likes and dislike questions, we get roughly 16 words, right? In this approach, we get roughly 56 words, roughly 3.5 times the amount of information. 25% more occurrence of emotion, 17% additional sentiment classification, 27% additional classification for cognitive states, and a much better understanding of attribution detection. So specifically, if somebody's talking about a video experience, they're saying, you know what, it drives me crazy that as I'm scrolling through the process and I'm doing search, once I finally find it and I select the video, it doesn't go into autoplay, right? It drives me crazy that I have to go through the whole search process again. What if we could identify each and every one of those to the point that we could actually help a UX designer what they specifically need to go in and fix in the user experience? What if we could connect the dot that tightly that we don't have to have any other interpretation? We know it at that level of detail. So what's the value of this approach? We focus on emotions, we focus on cognitive states, we focus on attributes, and linking all of those together so that we can start to prioritize those issues for customers. One of the things that we find in unstructured data and all the work that we've done for our clients is that volume is not necessarily that important. In many cases, it's the latent signal where there's a lot more emotion that's far more valuable. And I use the example, we all seen the commercials for men's razors today, right? I love those commercials, but you would think that the fact that packaging is so unfortunate, and the fact that we have to go find them, we have to go hand in a ticket to get them, is a really big deal for us. I am a huge Gillette fan. Right? I don't care what they do to them. I don't care if they put them behind bars. I don't care if I have to stand in line for them. I'm going to take them. Packaging is a bit of an issue. The process is a bit of an issue. But I love the product. Until they change that product, right, I'm really not going to care that much. And what if we could identify and distinguish throughout the customer experience what those things are that actually move the needle so that you could then prioritize around those? So ultimately, this is kind of the money slide that customers are looking for. What if I was able to put every customer experience on a relative scale, both on the negative side and on the positive side? And we could identify the attribute drivers behind each and every one of those. If we could prioritize that, right, and do that at scale, right, this becomes a real opportunity for companies to get this unfiltered truth that they can get visibility to help them understand where they should be spending their time, effort, and energy. So I'm going to talk about an example here. The customer scenario is the customer is an on-demand instant video, or in the instant video business. And that could be any one of Netflix, Hulu Plus, Apple, Amazon, Roku, so on. There was a publicly documented customer satisfaction metric that this particular company did not look great, right? That motivated the organization to take action. Everybody descends on it. What are we going to do? The first thing they did is they went to Qualtrics and they did a study and a survey. And they came back with, they don't like it. That's it. They don't like it. Could be some of these things, but we're not exactly sure, right? And that wasn't good enough for the customers. And so they wanted to look for another alternative that would get them to this level of analysis where they could really have some confidence in what they were looking at. So they knew they had issues. They needed to understand what they were. And what they really felt they needed to do is they have a tremendous amount of unstructured data, the login process. They actually see buffering. They see every aspect of the process. It comes back in terms of machine-generated information. What if we could take that machine-generated information, marry it up with voice of customer feedback, right, in real time, link those two together, and put us in a position to give that to UX designers so that they can make decisions very quickly. Single straight shot. I don't need anybody in the middle, right? I go straight from data, interpretation happens, I give it to a UX designer, and I prioritize around the budget. So in this case, what they had done in the past is they have this data. They know what's working, they know what's not working, but they don't really understand the whole process behind it. It's hard for them to prioritize the sequence of events across this process. And so they end up going, yeah, we agree with the study. We aren't as good as everybody else, but we don't know specifically what to do, but we think we have an idea, right? And that leads to, as you all know on kind of the client side, that leads to a lot of potential wasted money, effort, energy. You go ahead, you do your point release on the website, people see it, and you don't see the results play out. And so you go through this iterative process, and you're constantly going through this educated guessing process. What we did is we worked with them to basically introduce a method for analyzing unstructured data, marrying this data together inside our platform so that we could give them this direct view. As a result of going through this process, now data actually flows in both on the unstructured side and the structured side. It delivers a very specific metric to them, and they can prioritize every aspect of the overall customer experience so they need what to focus, so they know what to do in order to focus on to deliver better insights. So what do they get out of this process? Out of this process, they get likes and dislikes, innovation ideas, resonating features, and messaging by emotion, by demographic, by persona, by platform. That includes by device, right? So we're talking about a multidimensional analysis here because all the user experiences are slightly different across all the different device types, along with all the examples. So we kind of roll all this information up so that they have a really clear understanding as to what happens behind the scenes. And then this is just one of the screenshots that they have, where these are all the individual topics that they're monitoring. It's actually not all of them, but these are all the individual topics, and then they can take that and they can look at it by all of the individual devices, right? So by topic, by device, they can create a roadmap of what they need to do in order to go in and create a better user experience for their customers. So at the end of the day, what they can do is they can take all this data together and they can integrate it. They can identify not just the obvious things, but those things that are more latent, bolstered by emotions and personas and other cognitive states. We can integrate it with other information, but most valuable is this relative scale associated with each consumer touch point that we're looking at. So who does it touch inside the organization? It touches the innovation side of the organization. It touches their research function. It touches their marketing insights group, and it really also touches kind of the consumer engagement side. So that's what I had to talk about today in terms of hopefully a good example. So I don't know how much time I have. Are there any questions? No questions? OK, well, thank you very much. OK. Yeah.
Hey there. You showed that slide about imaginative question types versus like traditional open ends.
Yes.
And the fact that they had much higher response, like way more words used and whatnot. Does that affect kind of your completion percentage? Or because like obviously it's a much more involved answer?
Completion rates are actually about 4 times higher. I didn't have it on the slide. And the reason it's 4 times higher, and we've done research on the reason why it's 4 times higher, is just because it's so much more in tune with how people want to communicate their ideas. Remember, we're only going in with 1 or 2 questions. It's typically that question and perhaps a Likert scale. Now, what we're going to be doing is we're integrating our platform with AYTM, and we're going to give people the ability to basically have skip-level logic based upon the analysis of our data. So we structure the data, and you can actually drive skip-level logic to go in and then ask more specific direct questions if you choose to. But our response rates on those individual questions are generally very high. We consider it to be more of a micro-survey that emits a better response from consumers. Okay?
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for David?
OK, well, thank you very much.
All right.